So hello, everybody, and welcome to the First Empathy Surplus Congress. It's Tuesday, June 29th, and my name is Chuck Watts, past president of the Empathy Surplus Congress, filling in for Anna Bruffy, who's having some technical difficulties. She may be coming in and out of our Congress. I live in Wilmington, Ohio with my wife of 52 years, retired from Edward Jones, founded the Empathy Surplus Project Foundation back in '09, and have one daughter, 6 Black grandchildren, and so that's me. So Miriam, tell us who you are.
Sure. Miriam Speaight. I also live in Wilmington, Ohio. I live on a farm with my husband, my daughter and her husband, and almost 2-year-old granddaughter. And we have been farming together for 40 years. We also had a retail agricultural equipment business. And I'm also a Quaker pastor and a Reiki master.
Awesome. Maribeth.
I'm Maribeth Bevis, and I'm in Maineville, Ohio, just outside.
Can barely hear you, Maribeth.
I must have a bad microphone on here. Is it better now?
That's better.
Okay, I am Maribeth Bevis. I'm in Maineville, Ohio, just outside of Cincinnati. I'm a retired middle school teacher, and I've turned my teaching skills to teaching senior fitness. So I teach 7 senior fitness classes a week, and I really enjoy that.
Hi, Marie.
Hi, Marie Starring here. I live in Kingston, Ohio with my husband and 3 dogs, and I am new to this group, so thank you.
Glad you're here. So we're discussing Chapter 8, 8.5 of Dr. Lakoff's Your Brain's Politics. It's written by George Lakoff and his colleague Elizabeth Whaling. It's in a sort of an interview format, and the sections are real short, and so we're gonna read this section 8.5 in the name of 2 freedoms. And contested concepts and political communication. And I'll be Elizabeth. Who wants to be George?
I want to be George.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool. So Elizabeth says, let's discuss the significance of essentially contested concepts for political communication. For one, you can use words like freedom without describing what you mean by it exactly, without textualizing it. You offer your listeners the semantic skeleton of the idea and let them interpret it in terms of their own values and ideals, with the result that people can project different and even contesting values onto the idea, believing that theirs are the values that you're advocating.
And even contrasting values on your idea. So George says, exactly. The mechanism is used a lot in politics. It can be quite convenient, especially for short-term effects. When George W. Bush gave his second inauguration speech on January 20th, 2005, he used the words freedom, free, and liberty 49 times. About half the time, he didn't contextualize them in terms of a conservative worldview. He said things along the lines of, we need to bring freedom to people around the globe. Conservatives and progressives understood sentences like this one equally as well.
Equally as well, but not in the same way.
Yes, progressives interpreted his words in terms of a nurturant worldview and probably said to themselves, he's right. We need to free people around the globe from despair, intolerance, and violence. Conservatives, however, interpreted the president's words in terms of a strict worldview, thinking, right on, Mr. President, we must bring people around the globe the freedom to pursue their self-interests in true free market societies.
The president was essentially giving two inauguration speeches, one in the minds of progressives, one in the minds of conservatives.
Yes, at least during the first part of his speech. Then he shifted gears and started talking about expanding freedom at home in the US. From this point on, he talked straight conservative freedom. If you were a progressive at home in front of the TV or radio, you had an interesting experience. From 1 minute to the next, you no longer knew what the man was talking about. In the second part of the speech, the freedom concept was used in a strictly conservative context, contested in terms of strict father values. What's interesting is that the document George W. Bush was looking at during his speech apparently had markers at exactly those moments where the conservative contestation of freedom was being used. This probably means that whoever wrote the text intended to use the two different meanings of freedom.
One of the most interesting sentences in George W. Bush's second inauguration speech was, quote, "In America's ideal of freedom, the public interest depends on private character, on integrity, and tolerance toward others, and the rule of conscience in our own lives. Self-government relies in the end on the governing of the self."
I agree, that was a remarkable sentence. And as progressives listened to it, they probably asked themselves, what is that about? Well, it was about moral strength and self-discipline. If all US citizens just developed the discipline and strength to look after themselves, the well-being and freedom of all would be maximized.
Another remarkable sentence, according to Elizabeth Whaling, from that speech was, and I quote, "By making every citizen an agent of his or her own destiny, we will give our fellow Americans greater freedom from want and fear and make our society more prosperous and just and equal," unquote. Both statements obviously only make sense within a strict father worldview. The only way to free our society from want and fear is to incentivize citizens to become completely self-reliant. In order to become sufficiently self-reliant, you need to develop as much self-discipline as you possibly can. To become self-disciplined, you first need to be disciplined by others through tough love. Behind this is the idea that government intervention, such as social programs and public health care, get in the way of people's freedom. Society has to remain highly competitive so that everyone can pursue his or her self-interest. Therefore, a well-functioning system of social and economic reward and punishment must be in place. Providing people with things they have not earned for themselves creates dependencies, which minimizes their freedom.
And George says, and in this worldview, society is better off if people pursue their own interests. It's interesting that George W. Bush used the words just and equal in this context. What he means is that society is more just if moral strength is rewarded and moral weakness is punished. And society is more equal if everyone can compete freely in pursuing their individual well-being, free from governmental interventions such as regulations and social welfare.
Elizabeth says, if you are a progressive, the exact opposite applies. Freeing your fellow citizen from want and fear and making our society, quote, more prosperous and just and equal, unquote, means to take on responsibility for your fellow Americans by helping to take care of those who need it. For instance, the social welfare system, public health care, good public education, or what guarantees equality, prosperity, and freedom from want and fear. It's remarkable that the US media didn't really discuss the fact that the freedom principles of George W. Bush that he was talking about stood in stark contrast to the progressive notion of freedom that many Americans hold.
Well, some journalists at least talked about the fact that they were quite confused by the speech.
Yes, and yet none of those journalists discussed explicitly the fact that the president used freedom to convey conservative societal order.
Well, I don't disagree with you, Elizabeth. It's the job of US journalists to recognize what's going on and openly discuss the implications of conflicting interpretations of American freedom and the potential fallout for politics and policy making.
So my word or phrase for this was county ineffectiveness is dangerous. County ineffectiveness is dangerous. Miriam, did you have a word or phrase?
My word or phrase is public health care gets in the way of people's freedom. Maribeth, do you have a word or phrase?
I plucked out that sentence. In America's ideal of freedom, the public interest depends on private character. I won't read the whole thing, but that one I wanted to pick apart more. So that's what I dwelled on.
Marie?
Want and fear is to incentivize citizens to become completely self-reliant in relation to those two different views.
All right. So I use my word or phrase actually in an email this week, and so I'll share it with you. County effectiveness. Here, let me turn on my. Hold on a second, so I can get on. Get our stopwatch here. County ineffectiveness is dangerous. 99% of scientists agree that our carbon pollution blanket that heats the earth and causes bigger storms is a threat multiplier to our human rights to health, safety, and prosperity. And last week, a major straight wind storm in my county caused an estimated $1 to $3 million of damage in my 45177 zip code, and still no linkage was made by local officials to the climate crisis. The pandemic has not taught local officials that we must strengthen our care for each other, listen to our scientists, and strengthen our public health and safety infrastructure. County ineffectiveness is dangerous. And scientists agree that to make progress, we need an effective, empathic government. Furthermore, such a government that promotes intentional collaboration with ethical businesses and civil society defines a progressive politics of care in any political party. Why? Because our carbon pollution blanket has been caused by a politics of domination, funded by corrupt corporations and their allies. Conservative government limits empathic government and compromises empathy for and responsibility to all Americans. We should walk away from it to make progress. county ineffectiveness is dangerous. I love Clinton County. Quote, I love Clinton County and believe there are tremendous resources and energy here. People really care in these communities, unquote. I totally agree with this workshop participant quote from the summary memo from the Clinton County Regional Commission, CCRPC, of their 2040 strategic plan. However, since our climate crisis didn't make it into the summary report of the county strategic plan, I'd like to know why. County ineffectiveness is dangerous. In fact, I submitted an 11-page position paper to the Clinton County 2040 strategic plan. In it, I mentioned the word climate and carbon pollution blanket 17 times. And the CCRPC preliminary strategic summary doesn't reference any climate crisis. Furthermore, my organization sent complimentary copies of the Illustrated Universal Declaration of Human Rights to the County Port Authority. They accompanied, the books accompanied an invitation to intentional collaboration that included 10 principles that 50 major USA companies doing business in Clinton County use. These 50 companies have at least acknowledged 2030 as a major climate survival deadline. I'm still waiting for a callback from the Port Authority. Miriam?
Okay, the sentence was, behind this is the idea that governmental interventions such as social programs and public health care get in the way of people's freedom. Conservative strict father values are harming us, at the very least harming us, if not killing us. Ineffective government and conservative strict father values of self-reliance and self-care and responsibility goes against every human, the way we are made as humans. Empathy and compassion are a human trait that gets activated when we have a collapse in a condominium, or when 9/11 happened. We all wanted to go and help. It was a basic human reaction. And but conservatives try to put that on ice, and they think everybody should take care of themselves. And so a thing like a pandemic or a climate crisis just doesn't make sense to them, and they just bury further into their holes. And you know, they've been raised not to be compassionate. It's a basic human trait, but it can be thwarted. And so talking about effective government and mutual responsibility to each other, and being more compassionate, believing in a compassionate God, emphasizing that story of compassion from God instead of strict Father God, so that brains can start to think that way, the way they were intended to think, as just basic human beings. And there's scientific proof that this is a basic trait of survival, to be compassionate towards one another and to help one another in, and not only in emergencies, but ongoing throughout our lives. Marie?
You got another 30 seconds if you want it.
No, that's okay. I'll move on.
Okay.
Marie, are you ready?
Sure I am, thank you. Want and fear, at its simplest. I'd come up with 2 news articles that show the contrast between strict father, you know, role of politics and a nurturant parent role. And was going to compare and contrast those, but I've lost my notes. So I'll go ahead and talk about California has, oh golly gosh, it was not California. Well, anyways.
You can pass, it's okay.
I'm gonna go ahead and pass.
It's all right.
All right, that's all right. You get it.
We get it. Technological difficulties. Maribeth.
I don't know, for some reason that sentence from the speech, in America's ideal of freedom, the public interest depends on private character, and it goes on and on. And so I had to read this chapter a few times to figure out what is it about it that bugs me? Why am I bugged by this? And then I realized if you take that speech out of its historical context, it's easy to pick, and I'm not a George Bush fan by any means, and I think we can all agree he was not a great communicator. Not in the manner of Barack Obama could give a speech about spam and inspire all of us because he was that charismatic, and George Bush just did not possess that skill. And unfortunately, historically, when this speech was given, it was a time of great duress in our country, coming out of 9/11. And this was the beginning of his second term. And I think this was his weak attempt at healing the country, trying to appeal to both sides. And I think that's why it came off so discombobulated, because this is not his forte. So that's the first thing. I don't think it's fair to pull a speech like that out of its historical context and say, what in the heck was he trying to do? I really believe that was his crazy attempt to say something to draw the progressives in and say something to keep the conservatives trying to draw us together. So that being said, but then I did some digging about essentially contested concepts. And what I found, basically framing, which is essentially multitasking, and our brains cannot multitask. So if we try to insert a frame that's different from what someone is already thinking, our brain doesn't have the capacity to do that. There's 2% of the population that are super thinkers that can actually do that. And chances are we are not them. Maybe you are, but I know I am not. And so once those concepts become radicalized, which is what has happened. We used to think radicalization was reserved for Islamic terrorists, but we have it right here in our backyard.
About 30 seconds.
We have radicalized people, and us repeating the same phrase over and over again will not break that radicalization. It will not. So we need to find some other tactic. If we can get the middle of the road people, but we are never going to change the minds of the radical thinkers, the diehards, just by repeating our phrases over and over again. It's not going to happen, which is sad. But all the research shows that it's just not a possibility to change those concepts about freedom.
Okay, so we're entering into our discussion period. Anything that comes to mind for people, as in terms of not only the reading, if you want to expand on that, but what others have said?
Well, I guess, this was a little depressing for me to know that there's two conversations going on at once, or there's two reactions, and that, the speechwriter for that speech for George W. Bush intentionally was saying, I'm going to touch on them and I'm going to touch on them, and, we'll get those people together, or at least we'll have their minds going and thinking that they're agreeing with us, and when really we're not. And so it was a little depressing for me. I guess Maribeth saying that there's just no results of research that says we can change the radical mind. And that's a little depressing, but there have been some instances where a radical, like KKK individual's mind has been changed. And I guess I have to hold on to that hope. But it is a daunting task, that's for sure. And I think, Maribeth, you have a way of, that the other way you're seeking is, how can I get them off their train track? How can I just bump them off a little bit and make them look around? Yeah.
So, Maribeth, I really like your insights, and George would call what you've described, the inability to multitask. George calls that mutual inhibition, so that when you're in one frame, it physically blocks the other frame. It's physically impossible to think about the other frame. What I like, the example I like is, if you're standing at the beach looking out over the ocean, you can't see the shore behind you. It's physically impossible because we don't have eyes in the back of our heads. Or another way of saying it I like is that, if I'm doing exercise and I'm doing a curl and I've got my weight in my hand and I pull and I curl the weight up, to make this muscle tight, this muscle must relax. It's physically impossible for both muscles to be tight at the same time. That's an example of mutual inhibition. And so George says the whole purpose of his books is not to teach us how to convert the radical conservative, the extreme conservative, because, as you said, it's virtually impossible. The role of the Empathy Surplus Project is to strengthen the core progressives and to convert biconceptuals, the people who have both values in their heads. What some people call moderates, but George doesn't like moderate. But so the repetition of one's values all the time can and will convert biconceptuals, because it requires them to think about what it is that, if we're doing a good job at filling in the blanks, if we just if we don't fill in the blanks, to use his example here about freedom, if we don't describe what we mean by progressive freedom, then just talking about freedom doesn't help convert progressives to our way of thinking. We actually have to go the extra mile and actually say what we mean by freedom from want, freedom from fear. What does that mean from a progressive, empathic, and mutually responsible worldview?
I agree, but I also believe that in the past 4 years, a lot of those biconceptual people have been swallowed up and have been radicalized, and we have more radicalized Americans than ever before.
Yes.
And
yes.
And it is a problem, and I don't.
Yes.
I don't see a positive turn in that. Without, they have to be willing.
Yes.
Which they're not. And then it takes deep therapy to turn.
Yes.
Deep therapy to
Yes.
rewire that and change that. virtually impossible for just the normal people like us
Yes.
to get through to them. So we're kind of wasting, it's like my hairdresser in Wilmington who thinks that Biden's a clone and all these crazy ideas. And Bill Gates has microchipped me because I took the vaccination, and now Bill Gates is following me around, which I don't know why Bill Gates wants to know what I'm doing, but okay. I'm never going to change her mind. I am never going to fix that. That's beyond my capabilities. And I think, when we meet up with people like that, we're best off to just say, God bless, hope you have a good day, and let it drop, because I've learned we're spinning our wheels. We're not going to, and she at one point was biconceptual. She was, you could have a converse. She was always been a conservative, but you could have a intellectual conversation. Now it is craziness. It is, it's certifiably nutty, the conversations, and I can't fix that. I can't even have a conversation with that.
So one of the things that George talks about in Don't Think of an Elephant, and I want to pay attention to our time because it gives us enough time to do our recite our four empathic activities, which I forgot, and do the Caring Citizen Declaration. But, one of the things that he spelled out in Don't Think of an Elephant in 04, which really, which speaks directly to what you're talking about, Maribeth, that really inspired me, is found in our framing guide, Words to Use to Frame Our Solution. And it's how to respond to conservatives. And I think there are 28 guidelines, and I think it's like number 3 or 4 or something, but you can find it and read it. But he reminisces in that short section about his classroom, where his students in cognitive science would, right before Thanksgiving would be saying, God, I'm going home to Thanksgiving, and my conservative uncle is going to be there, and we're going to get in a big old fight, and it's just going to be awful. What do I do? And George, bless him, he's just got the biggest heart, says, don't fight with your uncle. Instead, ask him what he's most proud of that helped the most people. And that question activates what Miriam was talking about, activates the empathic, neural pathways, when I was helping other people. And if you can drill down on that and have a conversation on that kind of care, then the challenge is, how do you expand limited empathy? Because every conservative has empathy. It's just limited to my tribe, so how do you activate the empathy and try to expand it? So I would say that when, and it's a challenge because I'm in those situations as well. When you bump into the hairdressers or I was at the doctor, in the getting my ultrasound for my heart, and bless her heart, she was doing a great job, and then I asked, I said, so, we're in the dark, she's at her computer, and she's showing me my heart, and it's bumping and it's beating and pumping and it's got sounds to it and all that kind of stuff. There's a lull in the conversation. I said, do you enjoy your work? And she says, yes, but I'm having to work a little extra because the hospital's having trouble to get people back, thanks to those progressives who are giving those people $300 extra, for unemployment, they just won't come back. And, I'm sitting, how do I respond to this? Because it just naturally comes out of well, it can naturally come out of us. I said, so So is this the job that you think has helped the most people for you? That's what that's how I try to reframe the conversation. Is this the job that you think you helped the most people? Or is it, or is it something else where you help the most people? Because if you don't own a media company, what do?
Well, right. And
Well, in my case, I created the Empathy Surplus Project, but anyway.
It's hard when you deal with someone who's radicalized. And I mean, and there is something warped in the brain. If you believe that people are cloned and people have been killed and replaced and I mean, craziness, totally craziness. You can't talk to that. It wouldn't have mattered. It doesn't matter what you say. It's beyond normal conversation.
Yes.
It really is.
Yes.
And you can, and I've been in this. I was in that position. I forget who said that to me just this past week. Well, nobody is coming back to work and I said, well, if you had a family to support and you actually made more money being off work than going to work, and your family depended on you to make that money, what would you choose?
That's a wonderful question.
Would you choose more money to support your family, or would you go back to work and make less money and not be able to support your family? What would you choose? And there was no answer. They just kind of were silent.
Yeah, well, that I think that's a wonderful response.
Yeah.
I think that we're called to do that.
Right.
I mean, it's the incremental, if we can do it, quite often it's the carriage remarks. We're driving home. I should have said,
Yeah, right.
I should have said this, but you did, it was perfect.
I will interject in conversations like that. But when someone tells me people are being cloned and things like, no.
Exactly.
I get a little nervous, I think, and you're cutting my hair.
You have scissors in your hand. I've been vaccinated. Are you looking for the chip, to cut it out on me,
And that's why I get a little nervous.
Exactly. Yeah.
One thing I do is on my mask, I wrote "got vax?" ? Because it just bugs me that, there's people that aren't vaccinated.
Right.
And the sad part is this variant is going to hit them hard.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
It's a ticking time bomb.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's the sad part.
Yeah.
So who wants to, we're doing things a little differently this time. We're going to have one person read our Four Empathic Activities. Who wants to do that? Anybody? Any volunteer?
I'll read them.
Okay, so here I'm going to pull that up real quick.
So we're going to go on mute while you read them, huh?
Okay.
Yeah, there you go. And we can read along on mute if we want to. So can you see that, Maribeth?
I sure can. Thank you.
Okay.
Our Empathy Surplus Congress is a community of practice. Every day, we promote the idea of stronger Americans, progressive markets, better futures, effective government of, by, and for people, and mutual responsibility by practicing 4 empathic activities. We inwardly digest and use the latest brain insights of Dr. George Lakoff to frame daily caring conversations to promote human rights. Invest in weekly congressional hearings about how we apply Dr. Lakoff's insights to advance caring policy directions. Implement caring policy directions through partnerships with ethical businesses, effective government task forces, and other caring society organizations. Invite others to join us and promote a politics of care.
I want to ask Marie if, do you think you could post your comments like on our Empathy Surplus Project reading group Facebook page that you had prepared? I'd be interested to see them.
Yeah, I'd like to see the links.
I would appreciate that.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Great
Awesome.
idea.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we'll look for them there on our Facebook. Is it called George Lakoff?
Yeah, it's the ESP George Lakoff discussion group.
Mhm.
You can get to it by going to the Empathy Surplus Project Facebook page and then look on groups. So who wants to read our Caring Citizen Declaration? Marie or Miriam?
Read anything today?
I sure have not read anything today, and I cannot see it from my screen here. Let me.
Oh, you can't? Well,
No.
Miriam can do it.
Well,
It's real tiny. Miriam can do it.
I can do it.
Yeah.
I have it on paper here as well.
Oh,
Wow, that's
Go
awesome.
for it. Yeah, I know.
That's awesome.
also you go for it, Marie.
Yeah.
Where are we at here?
It's just the Caring Citizen Declaration.
I'd have to find it.
Okay, well.
I'm gonna yield
Miriam-
again. I
yeah,
apologize.
it's no big deal. Miriam can do it.
Yeah, I'll do it. I am a caring citizen. I occupy empathy. I here highly resolve that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. I am a person with human rights. I care for my own safety and happiness and that of others. I am the solution to expanding life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And for the support of this declaration, joining caring citizens, known and unknown, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
Well, that's awesome. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to turn our recording off. Goodbye, everybody. And
Okay.